The stagecoach lurched violently as it hit yet another rut in the dusty road, jolting Eleanor Mitchell from her fitful slumber. She clutched her small valise closer to her chest, its worn leather the only familiar thing in a world that had become increasingly foreign with each passing mile. The year was 1875, and the Kansas Territory stretched before her like an uncertain promise. Eleanor dabbed at her brow with a handkerchief, the late June heat making the small space of the coach nearly unbearable. 3 days of travel had left her exhausted, her navy blue traveling dress wrinkled beyond salvation, and her nerves frayed to breaking. The letters from Yates Blackwood, her soon-to-be husband, were tucked safely in her reticule, each one read so many times that the creases were beginning to tear. "Not much further to Willow Creek, miss," the driver called down, his voice barely audible over the rumble of wheels. "Should be there before sundown." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, though she doubted he heard her soft voice. The other passengers, an elderly couple dozing against each other, and a traveling salesman clutching his sample case, paid her little mind. She was grateful for their indifference. It gave her time to compose herself, to rehearse once more what she would say upon meeting Mr. Blackwood. The correspondence had begun 6 months prior. After losing her parents to influenza and facing the prospect of living with her disapproving aunt in Boston, Eleanor had answered an advertisement in the matrimonial news. Yates Blackwood, cattle rancher of Willow Creek, Kansas, was seeking a bride of good character and sturdy constitution. His letters had been direct but kind, describing his prosperous ranch and promising a good life for a woman willing to leave the East behind. At 22, with no prospects and few options, Eleanor had accepted his proposal. The stagecoach slowed as they crested a hill, and Eleanor caught her first glimpse of Willow Creek. It was smaller than she had imagined, a main street with perhaps 24 buildings, a church steeple rising above the rest. The fading sunlight cast long shadows across the town, giving it a painting-like quality that momentarily eased Eleanor's apprehension. "Willow Creek," the driver announced unnecessarily as they rattled down the hill toward the town. Eleanor straightened her bonnet and smoothed her skirts, heart pounding. Mr. Blackwood had promised to meet her at the stagecoach stop. Would he be disappointed by her appearance after the long journey? Would she recognize him from the small tintype he had sent? The coach pulled to a stop outside what appeared to be a general store. Eleanor waited as the other passengers disembarked before gathering her courage and stepping down onto Kansas soil for the first time. She looked around expectantly, searching for a tall man with the dark beard from the photograph. The street was busy with evening activity, cowboys emerging from the saloon, shopkeepers closing up for the day, women hurrying home with baskets of goods. But no one approached her. "Miss Mitchell," the driver called, handing down her trunk. "This is all your luggage." "Yes, thank you," Eleanor said, reaching for her purse to offer him a tip. As she opened her reticule, a gust of wind swept through the street, catching her bonnet and tugging it loose. Eleanor gasped, one hand flying to her head while the other still held the open purse. Several coins spilled onto the boardwalk with a musical clatter. "Oh," she exclaimed, dropping to her knees to gather them before they rolled away. As she scrambled for the coins, she became aware of booted feet approaching. Looking up, she saw not the man she expected, but the town sheriff, his star badge glinting in the fading light. "Madam," he said, his voice stern beneath his thick mustache, "I'm going to need you to stand up slowly." Confused, Eleanor obeyed, clutching her recovered coins. "Is something wrong, sir?" The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Several witnesses reported seeing you with your hand in another passenger's bag during a stop in Council Grove. That passenger later reported missing $20. Eleanor's mouth fell open in shock. I never. There must be some mistake." "We've been telegraphed to watch for a woman of your description," the sheriff continued, looking pointedly at her distinctive auburn hair. "Traveling alone, headed west. But I'm Eleanor Mitchell," she protested, her voice rising with panic. "From Boston, I've come to marry Mr. Yates Blackwood." "He's expecting me," the sheriff looked unconvinced. "Blackwood's away on business in Topeka. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Mr. Blackwood wasn't here. The one person who could vouch for her identity was absent. "Please," she begged, "there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I've never stolen anything in my life." By now, a small crowd had gathered, watching the spectacle with undisguised interest. Eleanor felt their stares like physical touches, her cheeks burning with humiliation. "We'll sort this out at my office," the sheriff said, reaching for her arm. "Bring her trunk, Jim," he called to a deputy hovering nearby. Tears threatened, but Eleanor fought them back. This couldn't be happening. Not after everything she'd sacrificed to come west. Sheriff Wilson. A deep voice cut through the murmuring crowd. Eleanor turned to see a tall man on horseback approaching. Unlike the sheriff's neat appearance, this man was trail-worn, with several days' worth of beard shadow and dust coating his clothes. But there was something commanding in his posture that made the crowd part for him. "Young Blackwood," the sheriff acknowledged with a nod. "What brings you to town? Thought you were out at the north pasture." "Yard got word to me that my brother's bride was arriving today," the man said, swinging down from his horse with surprising grace for someone so tall. "Came to meet her since Yates is delayed." Hope surged in Eleanor's chest. Blackwood, this must be Yates' brother. She hadn't known he had a brother, but at this moment, she could have hugged him regardless. The man stepped closer, removing his hat to reveal hair the color of wheat, several shades lighter than the dark-haired man in the tintype. His eyes, a startling blue, assessed her briefly before turning back to the sheriff. "This appears to be the lady in question," he said. "What seems to be the problem?" The sheriff explained the accusation, during which the man, young Blackwood, though Eleanor suspected that was a nickname rather than his given name, frowned deeply. "That's nonsense," he said when the sheriff finished. "This is Miss Eleanor Mitchell, my brother's intended. I've seen her photograph." "There's no mistake." "Be that as it may," the sheriff said stubbornly, "I have reports of a thief who happens to be a woman with red hair," Young interrupted. "Do you know how many women with red hair there are traveling west these days? Dozens on any given week." "I need to hold her until this is cleared up," the sheriff insisted. "The law is the law." Young Blackwood's jaw tightened. "And what proof do you have beyond a vague description telegraphed from 2 towns over?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Procedure demands I'll vouch for her," young Blackwood said firmly, "with my land and my name." A ripple of whispers spread through the onlookers. Eleanor stared at the man in astonishment. He was vouching for her, a complete stranger. "You can't be serious," the sheriff protested. "Dead serious," Young replied. "If Miss Mitchell here turns out to be a thief, you can take my north pasture, 200 acres of the best grazing land in the county, and the Blackwood name as surety." The sheriff's eyebrows shot up. Everyone knew what the Blackwood name meant in Willow Creek. They were one of the founding families with a ranch that stretched for thousands of acres. "That's mighty confident, Young," the sheriff said slowly. "It's the right thing to do," Young replied, "and I trust my brother's judgment in choosing a bride." The sheriff looked from Young to Eleanor and back again, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he sighed. "Fine, she's in your custody until this is cleared up. But if that telegram from Council Grove confirms she's the thief, it won't," Young said with such certainty that even Eleanor almost believed him. He turned to her, those blue eyes softening slightly. "Miss Mitchell, I'm Yorick Blackwood. Welcome to Willow Creek. I apologize for the reception." Eleanor found her voice at last. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. I don't know what to say." "No need to say anything," he replied, picking up her trunk as if it weighed nothing. "Let's get you to the ranch. You must be exhausted." As Yorick loaded her trunk onto his wagon, which was parked nearby, Eleanor felt the stares of the townspeople following her. This was not how she had imagined her arrival, accused of theft, rescued by her fiancé's brother, the subject of town gossip before she'd even spent one night in Willow Creek. Yorick helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hand strong and steady. "Don't mind them," he said quietly, nodding toward the onlookers. "They'll find something new to talk about by tomorrow." "When will Mr. Blackwood, your brother, return?" Eleanor asked as Yorick climbed up beside her. "Yates should be back within the week," he replied, taking up the reins. Railroad business in Topeka took longer than expected. Eleanor nodded, unsure what else to say. The man beside her had just risked his land and family name for her, a woman he'd never met. It was a gesture so grand, so unexpected that she couldn't begin to process it. As they left town behind, the prairie opened before them, bathed in the golden light of sunset. Despite everything, Eleanor felt a flutter of excitement. This was her new home, wild, vast, and unpredictable, much like the man driving the wagon beside her. "Thank you," she said again, meaning it more than he could know. "Not many would have done what you did back there." Yorick's eyes remained on the road ahead, but she saw a slight smile tug at the corner of his mouth. "Welcome to the West, Miss Mitchell. Things are different here." Different indeed, Eleanor thought, and perhaps, despite this rocky beginning, that wasn't such a bad thing after all. The Blackwood Ranch lay 5 miles outside town, and darkness had fallen by the time they approached. Eleanor could make out the silhouette of a substantial 2-story house against the night sky, with several outbuildings clustered nearby. Lamplight glowed welcomingly in the windows. "Home," Yorick said simply as they pulled up to the house. An older woman hurried out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "There you are. I was beginning to worry." Her eyes fell on Eleanor. "And this must be Miss Mitchell. Welcome, dear. I'm Mrs. Cooper, the housekeeper." Eleanor smiled, grateful for the warm reception after the ordeal in town. "Thank you, Mrs. Cooper. I'm pleased to meet you." Yorick jumped down from the wagon and came around to help Eleanor descend. His hands spanned her waist as he lifted her down, the contact brief but enough to make her cheeks warm. "Mrs. Cooper will show you to your room," he said, stepping back. "You'll be staying in the guest room until the wedding. I'll bring in your trunk." "Thank you," Eleanor said, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Blackwood." He gave a small nod and turned to unhitch the horses. Mrs. Cooper guided Eleanor into the house, chattering amiably. "We're so pleased you've arrived safely, Miss Mitchell, Mr. Yates has been talking of nothing else for weeks. We've prepared the blue room for you. It has a lovely view of the sunrise." The interior of the house surprised Eleanor. She had expected something rustic, but the Blackwood home was well appointed, with polished wooden floors, comfortable furniture, and signs of refinement everywhere. Paintings hung on the walls, and bound books filled a large bookcase in what appeared to be a study. "This is beautiful," Eleanor remarked. "The Blackwoods have done well for themselves," Mrs. Cooper said proudly. "Started with nothing but a land grant after the war and built one of the largest cattle operations in Kansas. Mr. Yates has his father's head for business, and young Mr. Yorick has a way with the land and the cattle that's almost uncanny." They reached the top of the stairs, and Mrs. Cooper opened a door to reveal a charming bedroom with blue and white furnishings. A large window faced east, as promised, and a small fireplace took up one wall. "This will be your room until the wedding," Mrs. Cooper explained. "I've laid out fresh towels, and there's water in the pitcher for washing up. Are you hungry, dear? I can bring up a tray." "That would be wonderful," Eleanor admitted. "It's been a long journey. Of course, I'll be right back." "Make yourself comfortable." Left alone, Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to process the day's events. From the accusation of theft to Yorick Blackwood's unexpected intervention, it had been overwhelming. And now here she was in this lovely home, waiting to meet the man she had agreed to marry. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Yorick entered, carrying her trunk. He set it down at the foot of the bed, straightening to his full height, which seemed even more impressive in the confines of the room. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" he asked formally. "Yes, thank you. It's more than I expected." Yorick hesitated, as if debating whether to say more. Finally, he spoke. "I should explain about what happened in town. Sheriff Wilson is overzealous sometimes, but he means well." "I understand," Eleanor said, though the memory still stung. "But I don't understand why you would risk your land and name for me. You don't know me." Yorick's blue eyes studied her face. "My brother chose you. That's enough for me." He paused. "Besides, one look at you was enough to know you're no thief." Eleanor felt herself blushing again. "Nevertheless, I'm in your debt." "No debt," he said firmly. "We're to be family soon enough." There was something in his tone she couldn't quite identify. Resignation, perhaps. When will Mr. Blackwood Yates return? She asked again. Should be by week's end if all goes well with his business. Yorick moved toward the door. In the meantime, make yourself at home, Mrs. Cooper will take good care of you, and I'm usually around the property if you need anything. With that, he nodded and left, closing the door softly behind him. Eleanor exhaled slowly, only now realizing she'd been holding her breath. There was something about Yorick Blackwood that unsettled her, not in a frightening way, but in a manner that made her acutely aware of herself. It was disconcerting, especially given that she was here to marry his brother, Mrs. Cooper returned with a tray of food, hearty beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie, which Eleanor devoured gratefully. Afterward, she unpacked her few belongings, washed and changed into her nightgown. Despite the comfortable bed, sleep was elusive. Her mind kept returning to the events of the day, to the sheriff's accusations, and to Yorick Blackwood's unexpected defense. By the time dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold visible from her window, Eleanor had made a decision. She would use the days before Yates returned to prove herself worthy of the Blackwood name, and to ensure that Yorick's faith in her was not misplaced. The next morning, Eleanor rose early, dressed in her simplest day dress, a pale green cotton with minimal trimming, and made her way downstairs. She found Mrs. Cooper in the kitchen, already busy with breakfast preparations. "Good morning, dear," the housekeeper greeted her. "You're up with the chickens. Did you sleep well?" "Well enough, thank you," Eleanor replied. "Is there something I can help with? I'm quite handy in the kitchen." Mrs. Cooper looked surprised but pleased. Most young ladies would take advantage of a few days' rest before jumping into work, but if you're offering, you could knead that bread dough while I finish these eggs. Eleanor rolled up her sleeves and set to work. The familiar task was comforting after so much upheaval. "Will Mr. Yorick be joining us for breakfast?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh no, dear. Young's been up for hours. He takes coffee and biscuits at dawn and doesn't sit down properly until dinner. Ranch work starts early and ends late." Eleanor nodded, feeling a twinge of disappointment she couldn't quite explain. "What sort of man is Mr. Yates?" she asked after a moment. "His letters were informative but somewhat reserved." Mrs. Cooper chuckled. "That's Yates all over, reserved but fair. He runs this ranch like a business, efficiently and profitably. He's respected in these parts and he'll make a good husband, steady, reliable, and Mr. Yorick." The question slipped out before Eleanor could stop herself. Mrs. Cooper's hands paused briefly over the skillet. "Young is different. Where Yates is all business, Young feels things deeply. He's got away with animals, with the land. The hands would follow him anywhere." She sighed. "But he's had his share of heartache, that one." Eleanor wanted to ask more but sensed she had already pried enough. Instead, she focused on the bread, working the dough with perhaps more vigor than necessary. After breakfast, Eleanor asked Mrs. Cooper for a tour of the house and immediate surroundings. The housekeeper showed her the formal parlor, dining room, Yates' study, which Eleanor would not enter in his absence, and the various outbuildings. The ranch was impressive, far larger than Eleanor had imagined from Yates' descriptions. "And over there is the corral where Young breaks the new horses," Mrs. Cooper pointed. "He has a gift for it, never seen a man with such patience for wild things." As if summoned by her words, Yorick appeared in the distance, leading a chestnut horse. Even from afar, Eleanor could see the animal was skittish, tossing its head and prancing sideways. "Is that safe?" she asked, watching as Yorick spoke to the horse, one hand gently stroking its neck. "For most men, no," Mrs. Cooper answered. "For Young, as safe as sitting in church." There was unmistakable pride in her voice. "Would you like to watch? It's quite something to see." Eleanor nodded, and they made their way toward the corral. As they approached, she could hear Yorick's voice low, soothing, speaking words she couldn't distinguish. The horse was settling, though its ears still flicked nervously. Yorick looked up as they neared, his expression changing subtly when he saw Eleanor. "Mrs. Cooper, Miss Mitchell, come to see Firefly's progress." Miss Mitchell was curious about the ranch, Mrs. Cooper explained. "I hope we're not disturbing you." "Not at all." Yorick's attention returned to the horse. Firefly here is learning that humans aren't so terrible. As if to prove his point, he ran a hand down the horse's flank, and the animal shivered but didn't pull away. She's beautiful, Eleanor said, genuinely impressed by the horse's gleaming coat and proud bearing. She'll make a fine cutting horse once she learns to trust, Yorick agreed. Would you like to meet her? Eleanor hesitated. The animal was clearly still wild. She won't hurt you, Yorick assured her. Not while I'm here. Something in his tone, absolute certainty without a hint of boasting, made Eleanor believe him. She approached the fence cautiously. Hold out your hand, palm flat, Yorick instructed. Let her come to you. Eleanor did as he said, extending her hand through the fence rails. The horse eyed her suspiciously, nostrils flaring. She's deciding if you're a threat, Yorick explained. Just stay still. Heart pounding, Eleanor remained motionless. After what seemed an eternity, the horse stretched her neck forward and sniffed Eleanor's palm, warm breath tickling her skin. She likes you, Yorick said, a note of surprise in his voice. Firefly doesn't take to strangers easily. I'm honored, Eleanor said softly, not daring to move as the horse continued to investigate her hand. You can stroke her muzzle now if you want, Yorick suggested. Gently. Eleanor carefully raised her other hand and touched the horse's velvety nose. The animal allowed it, dark eyes watching her intently. You have a natural way with her, Yorick observed. Most city folk are too nervous around horses this size. My father kept horses, Eleanor explained. Nothing as magnificent as Firefly, but I grew up around them. Yorick's expression shifted, a new interest dawning. Your father was a horseman, a carriage maker, Eleanor clarified. In Boston, he loved the animals as much as the craft. Yorick nodded, seeming to file this information away. That explains it then. Horses can sense when someone understands them. Mrs. Cooper cleared her throat. I should get back to the house. Miss Mitchell, will you be all right out here? Eleanor looked to Yorick, who nodded. I'll see her safely back when we're done, after Mrs. Cooper left. A silence fell between them, broken only by Firefly's occasional nickering. Would you like to come inside the corral? Yorick asked suddenly. Eleanor's eyes widened. Is that wise? A smile touched his lips, transforming his serious face. I wouldn't offer if it wasn't. I've spent 3 weeks gentling Firefly. She's not fully broken yet, but she won't harm you if you're calm. Against her better judgment, Eleanor found herself nodding. Yorick opened the gate and offered his hand. She took it, acutely aware of the calluses that spoke of years of hard work. Inside the corral, the horse seemed even larger. Yorick kept one hand on Firefly's bridle and the other at the small of Eleanor's back, guiding her. Move slowly, he advised. Let her see you clearly. Eleanor approached the horse with measured steps. Firefly's ears twitched, but she remained still. That's it, Yorick encouraged. Now you can stroke her neck. Eleanor reached out, running her hand along the horse's sleek neck. The muscle beneath her palm was taut but not trembling. She's magnificent, Eleanor breathed. She is, Yorick agreed, watching them both. Caught her wild last month. She's coming along faster than most. Eleanor continued to pet the horse, marveling at the connection. After a few minutes, Yorick released the bridle entirely, allowing Firefly to move freely around them. To Eleanor's delight, the horse stayed close, occasionally nudging her shoulder with its nose. I think she's decided you're a friend, Yorick said, that rare smile appearing again. Good judgment on her part. Eleanor felt a rush of pleasure at the compliment. Thank you for allowing me to meet her. It's been a long time since I've been this close to a horse. You miss it, Yorick observed. It wasn't a question. Yes, Eleanor admitted. After my father died and we lost the business, there was no place for horses in my life. Something shifted in Yorick's expression, understanding, perhaps, or sympathy. There's plenty of room for horses here. Once you're settled, you should choose one for yourself. Every Blackwood needs a good mount. The casual way he included her in the family name caught Eleanor by surprise. In Boston, she had been Eleanor Mitchell, orphaned daughter of a failed businessman. Here, she would be Mrs. Yates Blackwood, wife of a successful rancher. The transition still felt unreal. I'd like that, she said simply. They spent another half hour with Firefly, Yorick showing Eleanor the basics of his training method. His patience was remarkable. as was his attunement to the horses' moods. By the time they left the corral, Eleanor had a new appreciation for the man who had vouched for her with his land and name. As they walked back toward the house, Eleanor gathered her courage. "Mr. Blackwood, Yorick," he interrupted. "Mr. Blackwood is my father or Yates, just Yorick is fine." "Yorick," she amended. "I wanted to thank you again for yesterday. You risked a great deal for a stranger." He was quiet for several steps. "I meant what I said. If Yates chose you, that's good enough for me. Still, it was a considerable risk. 200 acres is no small matter." Yorick shrugged. "Land is just land without the right people on it." He glanced at her. "Besides, I knew you weren't a thief." "How could you possibly know that?" she challenged. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Your eyes," he said simply. "They're honest eyes." Eleanor felt a flush creeping up her neck. No one had ever spoken to her so directly, with such certainty. "Most would say that's poor judgment on your part," she said, trying to lighten the moment. "Trusting a stranger based on their eyes." "Maybe," he conceded, "but I've found I'm rarely wrong about people." He started walking again, or horses. Eleanor hurried to keep pace with his long strides. "Tell me about your brother," she said. "You two must be close." Yorick's expression closed slightly. "Yates is a good man, fair, hardworking. He built this ranch into what it is today." "But," Eleanor prompted, sensing something unspoken. "No, but," Yorick said firmly, "he'll be a good husband." "Provide well, He seemed to search for words. "Yates sees the world differently than I do. He's practical, sees things in terms of profit and loss. And you don't." Yorick's mouth twisted in a half-smile. "I see the beauty in a wild horse no one can ride. The potential in land others think is worthless, not always the most profitable way to look at things." There was something in his tone that suggested old disagreements, though he clearly wasn't being disloyal to his brother. "And what did Yates tell you about me?" Eleanor asked, curious what her future husband had shared. "That you were educated, came from a good family fallen on hard times, that your letters showed intelligence and character." He glanced at her. "He didn't mention you knew horses." "I suppose it didn't come up in our correspondence," Eleanor said. In truth, her letters with Yates had been formal, focused on practical matters of their arrangement. They had exchanged basic information about their backgrounds, expectations for marriage, and the logistics of her journey west. There had been little room for personal details like her affinity for horses. They reached the house, and Yorick paused at the door. "I have work to do with the hands this afternoon, but I'd be pleased if you join me for dinner. Mrs. Cooper makes a fine roast on Wednesdays." "I'd like that," Eleanor replied, surprised by how much she meant it. As Yorick strode away toward the barn, Eleanor watched him go, a strange feeling settling in her chest. In just one day, Yorick Blackwood had shown her more of himself than Yates had in 6 months of correspondence. The realization was unsettling. She was here to marry Yates, she reminded herself firmly. Yorick was to be her brother-in-law, nothing more. That he was handsome, kind to horses, and had defended her honor was irrelevant. She had made a commitment, and Eleanor Mitchell was nothing if not a woman of her word. Still, as she entered the house, she couldn't help but wonder what the coming days would bring before Yates returned to claim his mail-order bride. The next 3 days fell into a pattern. Eleanor would rise early, help Mrs. Cooper with breakfast, then spend the morning exploring the ranch or assisting with household tasks. In the afternoons, she often found herself drawn to the corral, where Yorick continued Firefly's training. He seemed pleased by her interest, answering her questions about horse training and ranch life with increasing openness. In the evenings, they would have dinner together, sometimes joined by the ranch foreman, a gruff but kind man named Wilson. After dinner, Yorick would retire to the study to handle accounts or correspondence, while Eleanor would read in the parlor or help Mrs. Cooper with mending. It was a simple routine, but Eleanor found herself settling into it with surprising ease. The specter of the theft accusation still lingered. Sheriff Wilson had sent word that he was awaiting confirmation from Council Grove, but on the ranch, far from town gossip, it was easier to put it aside. On the 4th day, Eleanor was in the kitchen garden with Mrs. Cooper, learning which herbs the housekeeper used in her cooking when they heard the sound of approaching horses. That'll be Young and the hands bringing in the new cattle, Mrs. Cooper said, shading her eyes to look toward the sound. They've been out since dawn moving them from the south pasture. Eleanor followed her gaze and saw a cloud of dust approaching, punctuated by the occasional bellow of cattle. As the herd drew closer, she could make out riders on horseback guiding the animals toward a large pen near the barn. It's quite something to watch, Mrs. Cooper remarked. Would you like to see? Eleanor nodded eagerly, and they made their way toward the cattle pen. The scene before her was straight out of the dime novels she'd secretly read as a girl, cowboys on horseback, expertly maneuvering among the lowing cattle, calling to each other with shouts and whistles. And at the center of it all was Yorick, astride a powerful black horse, directing the operation with the confidence of a general commanding troops. He spotted them and raised a hand in greeting before turning his attention back to a stray calf that had broken from the herd. He's in his element, Mrs. Cooper said proudly. Young may not have his brother's head for business, but there's not a better cattleman in 3 counties. Eleanor watched as Yorick rode after the calf, his movements in perfect harmony with his horse. He guided the animal back to the herd with subtle shifts of his weight and quiet commands. There was something mesmerizing about his skill, about the way man and horse moved as one. Once the cattle were secured in the pen, Yorick dismounted and approached them, removing his hat. His face was streaked with dust, his shirt damp with sweat, but his eyes were bright with the satisfaction of work well done. Ladies, he greeted them. Come to see our new investment. Miss Mitchell was curious, Mrs. Cooper explained. And I told her there's nothing quite like seeing a cattle drive, even a small one. Indeed, there isn't. Yorick turned to Eleanor. What do you think of your first Kansas cattle? Impressive, Eleanor said honestly. As was your handling of them. I've never seen anything like it. Yorick's expression warmed at the compliment. It's all in understanding the animals. Cattle have simple needs: food, water, and not to be frightened. Meet those needs and they'll go where you want them to. Is it the same with horses? Eleanor asked. Similar, but horses are smarter, more individual. A good horseman recognizes each animal's personality. He glanced toward the corral where Firefly was grazing. Speaking of horses, would you like to try riding Firefly tomorrow? She's gentle enough now for a short ride with supervision. Eleanor's heart leapt at the suggestion. Are you certain she's ready? I wouldn't want to undo your training. She's ready, Yorick assured her, and it would be good for her to get used to different riders, if you're comfortable with it. I'd love to, Eleanor said, unable to contain her enthusiasm. Yorick's smile deepened, reaching his eyes in a way she had rarely seen. Tomorrow morning, then, I'll have her saddled after breakfast. That evening at dinner, Eleanor found herself watching Yorick more closely than before. There was an ease to him now that hadn't been present in their first meetings, a comfort in her company that matched her growing comfort in his. Have you heard from Yates? She asked, realizing she hadn't inquired about her fiancé in days. Yorick paused, fork halfway to his mouth. Yes, a telegram came this afternoon. His business is concluded, but there's been a delay with the railroad. A bridge washed out north of Topeka after those heavy rains last week. Oh, Eleanor said, uncertain whether to feel relieved or disappointed at the extended delay. Will it be much longer? Another week, perhaps, Yorick replied, his tone neutral. He sends his apologies and hopes you're settling in well. Eleanor nodded, conscious of a guilty sense of pleasure at the news. Another week before Yates returned meant another week of this comfortable routine, another week of morning rides and evening conversations. Is that a problem? Yorick asked, watching her face. I know this isn't the welcome you expected. Not at all, Eleanor hastened to assure him. Everyone has been most kind, and I'm enjoying learning about the ranch. Yorick studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. Good, Yates will be pleased to hear you're adapting well. The mention of her fiancé sent a pang of something like regret through Eleanor. In the excitement of her new surroundings and the unexpected connection with Yorick, she had thought less and less of the man she had come to marry. Tell me more about your brother, she said suddenly. What sort of husband will he be? Yorick set down his fork, considering the question. Yates is steady, reliable. He believes in doing things properly. He paused. He'll provide well and treat you with respect. But, Eleanor prompted again, sensing the same reservation she had detected before. Yorick sighed. No, but just Yates sees marriage as a practical arrangement. He wants a wife to help run the household, to entertain business associates, to provide children to inherit the ranch. That sounds sensible, Eleanor said carefully. It is sensible, Yorick agreed. Yates is always sensible. There was no criticism in his tone, yet something in the way he said it suggested he viewed his brother's sensibility as a limitation. And what do you think marriage should be? Eleanor asked, the question slipping out before she could consider its propriety. Yorick looked at her directly, his blue eyes intense. I think it should be a partnership based on more than practicality. There should be understanding, shared joy in simple things. He glanced away. But then I'm not the one getting married. The statement hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm under his gaze when he looked back at her. I should retire, she said, rising perhaps too quickly. Tomorrow will be an early start if we're to ride. Yorick stood as well, ever the gentleman. Of course, sleep well, Eleanor. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver through her. Good night, Yorick, she replied, then hurried from the dining room, conscious of his eyes following her exit. In her room, Eleanor sat at the small writing desk by the window, intending to write to her aunt in Boston. Instead, she found herself staring out at the star-filled Kansas sky, her thoughts in turmoil. What was happening to her? She had come west to marry Yates Blackwood, a man she knew through carefully composed letters. Now, after less than a week in his home, she was developing feelings for his brother, feelings that went far beyond appropriate gratitude or familial affection. It was wrong. Dishonorable. Yet she couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach when Yorick smiled, or the way his presence made her feel both excited and at ease. This is madness, she whispered to herself. You've made a commitment to Yates. But even as she reminded herself of her obligation, Eleanor knew that something fundamental had changed. The prospect of Yates' return, once anticipated, now filled her with a growing sense of dread. Morning came with a sky washed clean by overnight rain, the scent of wet earth and prairie grass drifting through Eleanor's open window. She dressed quickly in her sturdiest skirt and a simple shirtwaist, pinning her hair more securely than usual in anticipation of riding. At breakfast, Mrs. Cooper noticed her excitement. Someone's eager to get on a horse, she observed with a smile. Is it that obvious? Eleanor asked, buttering a biscuit. Clear as day, the housekeeper replied. And I must say it's nice to see. Young doesn't often find someone who shares his enthusiasm for horses. Before Eleanor could respond to this observation, Yorick himself appeared in the doorway. Unlike his usual appearance at dinner clean and properly dressed, he was in his work clothes, with a bandana around his neck and his hat in hand. Morning, he greeted them. Fireflies saddled and waiting. She seems to know something special's happening today. Eleanor finished her breakfast quickly and followed Yorick out to the corral. Firefly stood saddled at the center, her chestnut coat gleaming in the morning sun. She nickered softly when she saw Eleanor. She remembers you, Yorick said, pleased. That's a good sign. He showed Eleanor how to approach the horse, how to check the saddle and bridle, and then helped her mount. The familiar feeling of being on horseback returned instantly, though Firefly was larger and more spirited than any horse Eleanor had ridden in Boston. Just sit quietly for a moment, Yorick advised. Let her get used to your weight. Eleanor did as instructed, gently patting Firefly's neck. The horse stood patiently, ears flicking occasionally. Now, just walk her around the corral, Yorick said. She knows the basic commands, but she's still learning. Eleanor clicked her tongue and squeezed her legs slightly. Firefly responded immediately, moving forward with a smooth gait. Eleanor couldn't suppress a smile as they circled the corral. You've ridden before, Yorick observed. More than just a casual rider, I'd say. My father let me exercise the carriage horses, Eleanor explained. And sometimes I'd ride with friends in the city parks, nothing like this though. After a few circuits of the corral, Eleanor felt confident enough to try a trot. Firefly responded eagerly, clearly enjoying the exercise. "She likes you," Yorick called from the fence. "Want to try taking her outside the corral? There's a nice trail along the creek." Eleanor nodded eagerly, and Yorick opened the gate. He mounted his own horse, the black gelding she had seen him riding with the cattle, and led the way. The trail wound through a meadow of wildflowers before descending to a creek lined with willows. Eleanor breathed deeply, savoring the fresh air and the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her. Beside her, Yorick rode in companionable silence, occasionally pointing out a feature of the landscape or offering a word of praise for her handling of Firefly. They stopped at a bend in the creek where the water pooled clear and deep. Dismounting, Yorick helped Eleanor down, his hands lingering briefly at her waist before he stepped back. "This is one of my favorite spots on the ranch," he said, leading the horses to drink from the creek. "I come here to think when the house feels too confining." Eleanor could understand why. The spot was beautiful willows trailing their branches in the water, wildflowers dotting the bank, the distant murmur of the prairie wind in the tall grass. "It's lovely," she said, sitting on a fallen log. Peaceful, Yorick settled beside her, leaving a proper distance between them. "Different from Boston, I imagine." "Very different," Eleanor agreed, "but in the best possible way. There's a freedom here that I never felt in the city." Yorick nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's what I love about the West, room to breathe, to be yourself without the weight of others' expectations." "Is that why you stayed?" Eleanor asked. "When Yates went east for education, you remained here." Yorick looked surprised. "He told you about that, a little," Eleanor said. In truth, Yates had mentioned it only in passing, noting that his brother had declined the opportunity for formal education, preferring to work the land. Yorick was quiet for a moment, watching the creek flow. "I tried the East, spent a year at a school in St. Louis when I was 16. Felt like I was suffocating in those classrooms, learning things that had no use on a ranch." He shrugged. "Came back and never regretted it. Yates was different, thrived in that environment." "Hence his business acumen," Eleanor surmised. "Exactly. He got the education, I got the practical experience. Between us, we make one complete rancher." There was a self-deprecating humor in his tone, but Eleanor sensed an old hurt beneath it. "You underestimate yourself," she said quietly. "What you do with the horses, with the cattle, that's a different kind of intelligence, but no less valuable." Yorick looked at her, surprise and something warmer in his expression. "Most people don't see it that way." "Then most people aren't looking closely enough," Eleanor replied simply. They fell silent, the only sounds the burbling creek and the occasional snort from the horses. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who understand each other without words. Finally, Yorick spoke again. "We should head back. Mrs. Cooper will have lunch waiting." They mounted and rode back toward the ranch, the horses setting a leisurely pace. As they crested a hill, the Blackwood house came into view, solid and permanent against the vast sky. "What do you think of it?" Yorick asked, noticing her studying the house. "Will it make a suitable home?" The question, innocent enough on the surface, carried deeper implications. This would be her home once she married Yates. She would be mistress of that house, wife to one brother while the other remained. What, a brother-in-law, a friend? The thought created a hollow feeling in her chest. "It's a fine home," she said carefully. "Any woman would be proud to call it hers." Yorick nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yates has worked hard to make it so." They rode the rest of the way in silence, a new tension between them that neither acknowledged. As they approached the ranch yard, Eleanor saw a wagon she didn't recognize parked near the house. A woman in a fashionable dress was speaking with Mrs. Cooper on the porch. "The widow Harrington," Yorick said, a note of resignation in his voice. Town busybody and self-appointed social arbiter of Willow Creek. Eleanor tensed. After the incident with the sheriff, she wasn't eager to face more town scrutiny. "Be warned," Yorick added as they dismounted. "She has a talent for making the most innocent situations sound scandalous." With that ominous introduction, they approached the house. Mrs. Cooper caught sight of them and waved them over, a strained smile on her face. "Ah, there you are," she called. "Mrs. Harrington has come to pay a social call on Miss Mitchell." The woman turned, assessing Eleanor with sharp eyes. She was perhaps 40, expensively dressed, with an artificial smile that didn't reach her calculating gaze. "Miss Mitchell," she greeted Eleanor. "I've been so eager to meet you. When I heard Yates Blackwood's mail-order bride had arrived, I simply had to come welcome you to Willow Creek." Her eyes flickered to Yorick, then back to Eleanor, noting their riding clothes and flushed faces with evident interest. "Mrs. Harrington," Yorick said, his tone cooler than Eleanor had ever heard it. "Kind of you to call." "Young Blackwood," the widow replied. "Always the devoted brother, aren't you? Taking such good care of your brother's intended while he's away." There was something insinuating in her tone that made Eleanor's cheeks warm. "Mrs. Cooper takes good care of all our guests," Yorick replied evenly. "If you'll excuse me, ladies, I have work to attend to." With a tip of his hat, he led the horses away toward the barn, leaving Eleanor alone with Mrs. Cooper and the visitor. "Come in, Mrs. Harrington," Mrs. Cooper said, gesturing toward the door. "I'll prepare some tea." Inside, Eleanor found herself seated in the parlor opposite Mrs. Harrington, whose smile had grown more predatory now that they were alone. "So, Miss Mitchell," she began, "you must tell me everything. How are you finding our little corner of Kansas? Quite different from Boston, I imagine." "It's lovely," Eleanor replied cautiously. "Everyone has been very welcoming." "Yes, I heard about your interesting arrival," Mrs. Harrington said, her eyes gleaming. "Such a dramatic entrance, accused of theft, only to be rescued by young Blackwood pledging his land and name." "Quite the romantic gesture," Eleanor stiffened. "Mr. Blackwood simply recognized a mistake and acted honorably to correct it." Of course," Mrs. Harrington agreed too quickly. "Though I must say it's unusual for a man to risk so much for his brother's mail-order bride. Especially young, who values his independence so fiercely." Eleanor wasn't sure how to respond to this observation, which seemed designed to provoke. Mrs. Harrington leaned forward slightly. "And now I find you riding alone with him, looking quite companionable. I do hope Yates won't be jealous when he returns." The implication was clear, and Eleanor felt a surge of indignation. "Mr. Yorick has been a perfect gentleman, showing me the ranch that will soon be my home. There is nothing inappropriate in his behavior or mine." "Naturally, Mrs. Harrington said, not sounding convinced. "Though you wouldn't be the first young woman to find herself torn between the Blackwood brothers. They're both handsome men in their different ways." Before Eleanor could respond to this outrageous statement, Mrs. Cooper returned with tea, saving her from what might have been an injudicious reply. The remainder of the visit was an exercise in diplomacy, with Mrs. Harrington probing for gossip while Eleanor parried her questions with increasingly vague answers. By the time the widow finally took her leave, Eleanor was exhausted from the effort of maintaining her composure. "Don't mind her," Mrs. Cooper said as they watched the wagon depart. "Mrs. Harrington has been trying to catch either Blackwood brother for herself since her husband died 3 years ago. She's just jealous." Eleanor sighed. "She seemed determined to imply something improper between Yorick and me." Mrs. Cooper's expression grew serious. "People will talk, dear. Especially with Yates away longer than expected. It might be wise to be careful about appearances until he returns." The gentle warning stung, even as Eleanor recognized its wisdom. She had done nothing wrong, yet the widow's insinuations had hit uncomfortably close to her private thoughts. "Of course," she said quietly, "I would never want to embarrass the Blackwood family after their kindness." Mrs. Cooper patted her arm. "I know that, dear, and so does young. Just keep in mind that small towns have long memories and active imaginations." The rest of the day passed quietly. Yorick didn't appear for dinner, sending word through one of the ranch hands that he was dealing with a sick calf and would eat in the bunkhouse. Eleanor told herself it was coincidence, not a deliberate avoidance after Mrs. Harrington's visit, but doubt nagged at her. That night she lay awake long into the small hours, her thoughts chaotic. The widow's visit had forced her to confront truths she had been avoiding. Her feelings for Yorick were growing stronger each day, and if a relative stranger could see it, how obvious must it be to others? To Yorick himself. More troubling was the realization that she felt no comparable emotion when thinking of Yates. The man she had agreed to marry remained a cipher, known only through formal letters and second-hand descriptions. How could she pledge her life to someone she might not love, especially now that she knew what real attraction felt like? By dawn, Eleanor had reached a painful decision. For everyone's sake, she would maintain a proper distance from Yorick until Yates returned. Only then, after meeting her fiancé in person, would she decide whether to honor her commitment or admit she had made a terrible mistake. The next morning, Eleanor wrote a note to Yorick, thanking him for the riding lesson but explaining that she would focus on learning household duties with Mrs. Cooper until Yates returned. It was cowardly, perhaps, to communicate this way rather than in person, but she didn't trust herself to maintain her resolve face to face. Mrs. Cooper delivered the note and returned with a brief reply. "As you wish. Firefly will be here when you're ready to ride again." For the next 3 days, Eleanor threw herself into domestic tasks, learning to make Mrs. Cooper's famous biscuits, cataloging the pantry supplies, and even attempting to master the intricacies of the ranch's financial ledgers, which Mrs. Cooper had retrieved from the study at her request. She caught glimpses of Yorick occasionally riding out with the hands at dawn, returning dusty and tired in the evening, but they did not speak beyond brief, polite greetings when their paths crossed. The distance hurt more than Eleanor had anticipated, yet she maintained it rigidly, telling herself it was for the best. On the 4th day of this self-imposed separation, a telegram arrived from Yates. Mrs. Cooper brought it to Eleanor in the kitchen, where she was experimenting with a pie crust. "From Mr. Yates," the housekeeper said, handing over the yellow paper. "Just delivered." Eleanor wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron before taking the telegram. Her heart pounded as she read the brief message. "Arriving tomorrow, stop bridge repaired, stop eager to meet you, stop Yates Blackwood tomorrow." After nearly 2 weeks of delay, her fiancé would finally arrive. Eleanor should have felt relief, excitement, or at least curiosity. Instead, she felt only dread. "Good news?" Mrs. Cooper asked, watching her face. "Mr. Blackwood Yates will be here tomorrow," Eleanor said, forcing a smile. "The bridge is repaired." "Wonderful," Mrs. Cooper exclaimed. "We must prepare. I'll have the hands slaughter a chicken for a special dinner, and we should air out the master bedroom. Yates has been gone nearly a month, after all." As Mrs. Cooper bustled about making plans, Eleanor remained still, the telegram clutched in her hand. Tomorrow, everything would change. She would meet the man she had promised to marry, and she would have to decide whether to go through with that promise or break it, causing pain and scandal either way. "Does Young know?" she asked suddenly. Mrs. Cooper paused in her planning. "Not yet." "The boy who brought the telegram is still here. I can send him to find Young if you'd like." "Please," Eleanor said. "He should know his brother is returning." As Mrs. Cooper went to dispatch the messenger, Eleanor sank into a kitchen chair, her earlier baking enthusiasm evaporated. The reality of her situation was crashing down around her. She had traveled across the country to marry a stranger, only to find herself falling in love with his brother. It was like something from a melodramatic novel, except there was no guarantee of a happy ending. An hour later, she heard the sound of boots on the porch and looked up to see Yorick entering the kitchen. He was dusty from work, his expression guarded as he removed his hat. "Mrs. Cooper said you wanted to see me," he said formally. "Is everything all right?" Eleanor handed him the telegram wordlessly. He read it, his face revealing nothing. "So he'll be home tomorrow," Yorick said, handing the paper back. "Good, he's been away too long." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, not knowing what else to say. Yorick studied her face. "Are you nervous about meeting him?" "A little," she admitted. It was the truth, if not the whole truth. Yorick nodded, seeming to understand more than she had said. "Yates is a good man. He'll make you happy." The words sounded rehearsed, as if Yorick was trying to convince himself as much as her. "I hope so," Eleanor said softly. "I came a long way to be his wife." Something flickered in Yorick's eyes, pain, regret, resignation before he mastered it. "You'll be a fine wife to him. These past weeks have shown me that." Eleanor couldn't bear the formality between them, not when tomorrow might end any chance of honesty. "Yorick, I don't," he interrupted gently. "Please, Eleanor, some things are better left unsaid." The use of her given name after days of careful distance broke something in her. Are they, even if keeping silent means making a terrible mistake? Yorick's expression tightened. What would you have me say? That I wish things were different? That in another world, another life? He stopped, shook his head. It doesn't matter. Yates chose you. You accepted him. The rest is irrelevant. It's not irrelevant to me, Eleanor said, rising from her chair. These past 2 weeks have shown me what's possible, what I never thought to find when I agreed to be a mail-order bride. Don't tell me you haven't felt it too. Yorick's jaw clenched. What I feel doesn't matter. Yates is my brother. His happiness matters more than mine. And what about my happiness? Eleanor challenged. Does that matter to either of you? Of course it does, Yorick said, his composure slipping. Why do you think I'm standing here telling you to marry my brother when every instinct is screaming at me to? He cut himself off again, running a hand through his hair in frustration. To what? Eleanor pressed, stepping closer. Yorick looked at her, raw emotion in his eyes. To tell you that from the moment I saw you in town, accused and alone, I knew you were something special. That every day since has only confirmed it. That the thought of watching you marry Yates is tearing me apart. The words poured out as if a dam had broken. But I won't betray my brother. I won't steal what's his. I'm not a possession to be stolen, Eleanor said, her voice shaking. I'm a woman who made a commitment before she knew there could be something more, something real. They stood face to face now, close enough that Eleanor could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, the tension in the set of his mouth. Tell me what to do, she whispered. Help me find the right path. Yorick closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. I can't make this decision for you. But know this, if you break your engagement to Yates, especially for me, it will destroy him and drive a wedge between us that may never heal. Are you willing to be the cause of that? The question hit Eleanor like a physical blow. In her emotional turmoil, she hadn't fully considered the impact on the brothers' relationship. Could she live with herself knowing she had come between them? I don't want to hurt anyone, she said, her voice small. Least of all you. Yorick's expression softened. Sometimes there's no path that doesn't lead through pain. He reached out, briefly touching her cheek with calloused fingers. Meet Yates tomorrow, give him the chance he deserves, then decide. With that, he turned and left, his shoulders rigid with controlled emotion. Eleanor remained in the kitchen, tears she hadn't permitted herself to shed finally falling. Yorick was right, she needed to meet Yates, to give him a fair chance. But in her heart, she feared the decision was already made, had been made days ago when she first looked into Yorick's eyes and saw something that resonated deep within her own soul. Tomorrow would bring Yates Blackwood home. Tomorrow would force a choice that would change all their lives irrevocably. And tonight, Eleanor would prepare herself as best she could to face that moment with courage and honesty. The day of Yates Blackwood's return dawned clear and warm. Eleanor had slept little, rising before the sun to bathe and dress with extra care. She chose her best day dress, a deep blue wool with modest lace trim, and arranged her hair in a simple but flattering style. Mrs. Cooper, sensing her nervousness, chatted cheerfully throughout breakfast, describing the special dinner she was planning and expressing her delight that the family would be together again. Mr. Yates will be so pleased to find you settled in, she told Eleanor. He's been planning for your arrival for months, you know, had the blue room prepared special, bought new linens for the master bedroom. She paused, noticing Eleanor's pallor. Are you feeling all right, dear? You've hardly touched your breakfast. Just nervous, Eleanor managed. It's not every day a woman meets her future husband. Mrs. Cooper patted her hand. That's natural, but you've nothing to worry about. Mr. Yates is a gentleman through and through. Eleanor nodded, not trusting herself to speak further. The housekeeper's kind words only increased her guilt. Everyone expected her to become Mrs. Yates Blackwood. Everyone except, perhaps, Yorick and Eleanor herself. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Eleanor helped Mrs. Cooper prepare the house, dusting furniture that didn't need dusting and arranging flowers from the garden in vases throughout the rooms. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from dwelling on the coming confrontation. Yorick was conspicuously absent, having ridden out at dawn with several hands to check on a distant section of fence, according to Mrs. Cooper. Eleanor suspected he was deliberately avoiding the house until his brother's arrival. Shortly after noon, they heard the sound of an approaching wagon. Eleanor froze in the act of adjusting a vase of wildflowers, her heart pounding so hard she feared it might burst from her chest. "That'll be him," Mrs. Cooper exclaimed, hurrying to the window. "Yes, it's Mr. Yates' wagon. Come, Miss Mitchell, let's greet him properly." Taking a deep breath, Eleanor followed the housekeeper onto the porch. The wagon approached steadily, driven by a man she could now see clearly for the first time. Yates Blackwood resembled his tintype dark-haired, clean-shaven, with regular features and a serious expression. He was handsome in a conventional way, dressed in a well-cut suit rather than the working clothes she had become accustomed to seeing on Yorick. As he drew closer, she could see that his eyes were brown, not the vivid blue of his brother's. He brought the wagon to a stop and descended with precise movements, adjusting his hat before approaching the porch. "Mrs. Cooper," he greeted the housekeeper with a nod. "Everything in order?" "Yes, Mr. Yates," Mrs. Cooper replied, "and as you can see, Miss Mitchell has arrived safely." Yates turned his attention to Eleanor, studying her with an appraising gaze that made her feel like a horse at auction. "Miss Mitchell," he said finally, extending his hand. "A pleasure to meet you at last. I apologize for not being here to welcome you properly." Eleanor took his hand, finding his grip firm but impersonal. "Mr. Blackwood, the pleasure is mine." Up close, she could see that Yates was perhaps 5 years older than Yorick, with fine lines at the corners of his eyes and a certain gravity to his bearing that made him seem older still. "I trust my brother has made you comfortable in my absence?" Yates asked, releasing her hand. "Very comfortable," Eleanor confirmed. "Everyone has been most kind." Yates nodded, satisfied. "Good, I've been eager to return and begin our life together." He gestured toward the house. "Shall we go inside? I've been traveling since dawn and could use some refreshment." Eleanor followed him into the house, Mrs. Cooper hurrying ahead to prepare coffee. In the parlor, Yates removed his hat and coat, hanging them precisely on the coat rack. "I received a telegram from Sheriff Wilson yesterday," he said as they sat opposite each other. "Apparently there was some confusion when you arrived, something about a theft accusation." Eleanor tensed. "Yes, a misunderstanding. The sheriff mistook me for someone else." "So I gathered," Yates said. "The sheriff mentioned that Yorick vouched for you." He frowned slightly. "Rather dramatically, according to Wilson. Something about pledging land and the family name." "Your brother was very kind," Eleanor said carefully. "He knew I was innocent and acted accordingly." Yates studied her, his expression unreadable. "That sounds like Yorick, always the impulsive one." There was no malice in his tone, just a matter-of-fact observation. In any case, the sheriff received confirmation yesterday that the actual thief was apprehended in Wichita, so the matter is closed. "I'm glad to hear it," Eleanor said sincerely. At least one cloud had lifted. Mrs. Cooper arrived with coffee and fresh biscuits, giving Eleanor a moment to collect her thoughts. As the housekeeper chatted with Yates about ranch matters, Eleanor observed her fiancé more closely. Yates Blackwood was everything his letters had suggested: intelligent, well-spoken, clearly successful in his business endeavors. He was polite to Mrs. Cooper, if somewhat reserved. There was nothing objectionable about him whatsoever. And yet, Eleanor felt nothing, no spark, no connection, not even the nervous excitement she might have expected upon meeting her future husband. Instead, she felt as if she were speaking to a business associate rather than the man she was to marry. When Mrs. Cooper withdrew, Yates turned his attention back to Eleanor. "I thought we might discuss the wedding," he said. "The minister can perform the ceremony this Sunday if that suits you. Nothing elaborate, just a simple service followed by a dinner here for some of the prominent townspeople." The directness of his planning took Eleanor aback. "This Sunday, that's only 3 days away." "Is that a problem?" Yates asked, looking genuinely puzzled. "I assumed you would want to settle the matter promptly, having traveled so far. And we did agree in our correspondence that a simple ceremony would suffice." They had indeed discussed such arrangements, but the reality of it making such a commitment to a virtual stranger struck Eleanor with new force. She began, then faltered. How could she explain her hesitation without revealing feelings she was still struggling to understand herself? Yates frowned slightly. Is something wrong, Miss Mitchell? You seem distressed. Eleanor took a deep breath. Mr. Blackwood, I think we should speak frankly. We've only just met, and while I appreciate your efficiency, I wonder if we might take some time to become better acquainted before setting a date. Yates looked surprised, then thoughtful. I suppose that's a reasonable request, though somewhat unexpected after our months of correspondence. He set down his coffee cup. May I ask what's prompted this caution? Has something occurred during your stay to cause concern? The question was innocent, yet Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. Not concern exactly, it's just that letters can only reveal so much. Now that we're face to face, I believe we owe it to ourselves to ensure compatibility before taking such an important step. Yates studied her for a long moment. You're not what I expected, Miss Mitchell. In what way? Eleanor asked, uncertain whether this was criticism or observation. Your letters suggested a practical woman, resigned to a marriage of convenience, yet you speak now of compatibility, of taking time. He leaned forward slightly. Has your perspective changed since arriving in Kansas? The question hit too close to the truth. Eleanor looked away, gathering her thoughts. Perhaps it has, she admitted. Seeing the ranch, understanding what life here would entail, it's different from imagining it from a Boston parlor. I see. Yates' tone was neutral, revealing nothing of his feelings. And is this change in perspective related to my brother's involvement in your reception here? Eleanor's head snapped up, her eyes meeting his. What do you mean? Yates' expression remained calm, analytical. Mrs. Harrington paid me a visit in Topeka 3 days ago. She happened to be traveling through and recognized my name at the hotel. She mentioned seeing you and Yorick riding together, looking quite companionable, was her word. Eleanor felt sick. Of course the widow would have seized the opportunity to spread her insinuations directly to Yates. Your brother has been a perfect gentleman, she said firmly. He's shown me the ranch and introduced me to life here while we awaited your return, nothing more. I didn't suggest otherwise, Yates replied. I know my brother's character. But I also know that Yorick has a way about him that women find compelling. There was no jealousy in his tone, just objective assessment. It wouldn't be the first time a woman has found herself drawn to his particular charms. Eleanor didn't know how to respond to this surprisingly perceptive observation. Had Yates guessed her feelings? Or was he simply warning her about his brother's supposed effect on women? Mr. Blackwood, she said finally, I came to Kansas in good faith to honor our arrangement. If you're suggesting otherwise, I'm not suggesting anything, Yates interrupted, his tone softening. Merely observing that circumstances change, people change. I would rather know now if your feelings have altered than proceed with a marriage doomed to unhappiness. His reasonable tone, his apparent openness to releasing her from their engagement, surprised Eleanor. This was not the reaction she had anticipated. Would you be relieved if I wished to break our engagement? She asked cautiously. Yates considered the question. Not relieved, no. Disappointed, certainly. I believe we could have a successful partnership. He paused. But I'm a practical man, Miss Mitchell. I've built my life on sound decisions and mutually beneficial arrangements. If you no longer see our marriage as beneficial to you, I would rather know it now. His candor was both refreshing and slightly dispiriting. There was no mention of love, of passion, of anything beyond practicality. It confirmed what Yorick had told her about his brother's view of marriage. I don't know what I want, Eleanor admitted, the truth finally emerging. I respected you from your letters, I still do, but being here, experiencing this place, meeting. She stopped herself before mentioning Yorick specifically. I need time to be certain, Yates nodded slowly. Very well, take the time you need, a week perhaps. If after that you still wish to proceed, we can set a date. If not, he shrugged. I can arrange for your return to Boston. Relief washed over Eleanor at this unexpected reprieve. Thank you for understanding. Yates stood, signaling the end of their conversation. I have business to attend to in my study. We'll dine together this evening with Yorick, and you can tell me more about your impressions of Kansas." His tone was polite but distant. After he left, Eleanor remained in the parlor, trying to process what had just happened. Yates had been reasonable, even generous in his response to her hesitation. Yet there had been something in his manner, a detachment, a lack of genuine emotion that reinforced her doubts about their compatibility. And then there was his casual mention of Yorick's particular charms and effect on women. Was there a history there? Had other women been drawn to the younger Blackwood brother, creating tension between the siblings? These questions were still circling in her mind when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Looking out the window, she saw Yorick and several ranch hands returning. Her heart quickened at the sight of him, dusty and wind-blown, his hat low over his eyes. As if sensing her gaze, Yorick looked up at the house. Their eyes met through the window, and even at a distance, Eleanor could feel the connection between them, a connection she had not felt even sitting 3 feet from her fiancé. In that moment, she knew with certainty that she could not marry Yates Blackwood. The realization brought both relief and dread. Relief that she would not bind herself to a man she could never love, dread at the thought of the pain and complications her decision would cause. She watched as Yorick dismounted, his attention caught by the sight of his brother's wagon. His posture stiffened, and he said something to one of the hands before walking toward the barn, deliberately turning away from the house. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Tonight, the Blackwood brothers would dine together with their guest, a woman promised to one but drawn irrevocably to the other. It would be a test of composure for all of them, a delicate dance of unspoken feelings and formal politeness. And afterward, Eleanor would need to find the courage to speak the truth. Whatever the consequences might be, dinner that evening was a strained affair. Yates sat at the head of the table, Yorick at the foot, with Eleanor between them, a physical arrangement that perfectly symbolized her emotional position. Mrs. Cooper had outdone herself with the meal, serving roast chicken, fresh vegetables from the garden, and her famous apple pie for dessert. The conversation was primarily between the brothers, discussing ranch business, cattle prices, and Yates' trip to Topeka. Eleanor contributed occasionally, answering direct questions but otherwise remaining quiet, studying the two men who had come to mean so much to her in such different ways. Yates was articulate and knowledgeable, speaking with the confidence of a man accustomed to being respected. Yorick spoke less but with deeper passion when the topic turned to the land or the animals. They worked well together, Eleanor realized, their different strengths complementing each other in the running of the ranch. "Sheriff Wilson mentioned your dramatic intervention on Miss Mitchell's behalf," Yates said during a lull in the conversation, his tone casual but his eyes watchful. Pledging the North pasture was quite a risk. Yorick met his brother's gaze steadily. "It wasn't a risk, I knew she was innocent." "Nevertheless," Yates persisted, "it was a bold move, especially for someone you'd just met." Yorick's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Would you have done differently?" "Perhaps not," Yates conceded, "though I might have found a less theatrical solution." He turned to Eleanor. "My brother has always had a flair for the grand gesture." There was something beneath the words, some history or tension that Eleanor couldn't fully grasp. Yorick's expression remained neutral, but she could see the effort it cost him. "I'm grateful for Mr. Yorick's intervention," Eleanor said carefully. "It spared me considerable unpleasantness." "Of course," Yates agreed smoothly. "And fortunately, the matter is resolved. The real thief has been caught, I understand." The conversation moved on to safer topics, but the undercurrent remained. By the time dessert was served, Eleanor felt exhausted from the effort of maintaining her composure. "Miss Mitchell and I had a productive conversation this afternoon," Yates announced as Mrs. Cooper poured coffee. "We've agreed to take some time to become better acquainted before setting a wedding date." Yorick looked up sharply, his eyes meeting Eleanor's briefly before turning to his brother. "That seems sensible," he said, his tone revealing nothing. "I thought you'd approve," Yates replied, a strange smile playing at his lips. "You've always advocated for following one's heart rather than one's head." The comment seemed pointed, and Eleanor saw Yorick's hand tighten around his coffee cup. "Sometimes the head and heart can agree," Yorick said quietly. "Rarely in my experience," Yates returned, "but perhaps Miss Mitchell will prove the exception." The rest of the meal passed in uncomfortable silence, broken only by Mrs. Cooper's determined attempts at conversation. When the dishes were cleared, Yates suggested they retire to the parlor, but Yorick excused himself, citing early work the next day. As he rose to leave, his eyes met Eleanor's once more, a world of unspoken feeling in that brief glance. Then he was gone, the sound of the front door closing like a period at the end of an unfinished sentence. In the parlor, Yates poured brandy for himself and offered Eleanor a sherry, which she declined. He seemed thoughtful, swirling the amber liquid in his glass before speaking. "My brother is in love with you," he said without preamble. Eleanor nearly gasped at the direct statement. "Mr. Blackwood, please," Yates interrupted, raising a hand. "Let's not pretend. I saw at the moment he walked into the dining room, and I see your feelings for him as well." His tone wasn't angry, merely resigned. "It's not entirely unexpected." "I don't understand," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yates sighed, setting down his glass. "Yorick has always felt things more deeply than I do. It's his nature, and women respond to that passion, that intensity." He looked at her directly. "I don't blame either of you. These things happen." "Nothing has happened," Eleanor insisted. "Your brother has been nothing but honorable." "I believe you," Yates said simply. "Yorick would never betray me, no matter his feelings. He's loyal to a fault." He paused, "which leaves us with a dilemma." Eleanor's heart raced. "What sort of dilemma?" "If you break our engagement to pursue Yorick, he'll refuse you out of loyalty to me. If you marry me despite loving him, we'll all be miserable." Yates stated these facts with the same detachment he might use to discuss a business problem. Neither option seemed satisfactory. "What do you suggest?" Eleanor asked, surprised by his analytical approach to such an emotional situation. Yates considered for a moment. "I need to think. This requires a solution that preserves dignity and relationships." He stood. "It's been a long day and we're all tired. Let's continue this discussion tomorrow, when we're fresher." Eleanor rose as well, grateful for the reprieve yet confused by Yates' reaction. She had expected anger, jealousy, or at least hurt. Instead, he was approaching the situation as he might a challenging business negotiation. "Good night, Mr. Blackwood," she said, uncertain what else to add. "Good night, Miss Mitchell," he replied, then added almost gently, "For what it's worth, I think you and Yorick would suit each other well, better than you and I would have." With that surprising admission, he left her alone in the parlor, her thoughts in greater turmoil than ever. Eleanor slept fitfully, waking at dawn with no clearer understanding of her situation. She dressed simply and went downstairs, hoping to find Mrs. Cooper in the kitchen, perhaps help with breakfast preparations to distract herself. Instead, she found Yorick alone at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling before him. He looked up when she entered, fatigue evident in his face. "Eleanor," he said, starting to rise. "Please don't get up," she said quickly. "I didn't expect anyone to be awake yet." "I couldn't sleep," he admitted, settling back in his chair. "Too much on my mind." Eleanor hesitated, then sat across from him. "Yates knows," she said quietly, "about our feelings." Yorick's expression tightened. "He spoke to you about it last night after you left. He was surprisingly calm." Yorick gave a short, humorless laugh. "That's Yates, always rational, even when his fiancée falls for his brother." He ran a hand over his face. "What did he say exactly?" Eleanor related the conversation, watching Yorick's reaction carefully. He seemed unsurprised by his brother's analysis. "That sounds like him," Yorick said when she finished, approaching it like a business problem to be solved. "Is he right?" Eleanor asked. "About you refusing me out of loyalty to him." Yorick met her gaze, conflict evident in his eyes. "He knows me well," he said softly, "but he underestimates how I feel about you." The admission, simple yet profound, made Eleanor's heart race. "And how is that?" Yorick reached across the table, taking her hand. "Like I've been waiting for you without knowing it. Like all the pieces of my life make sense now that you're here." His voice roughened. Like I would sacrifice almost anything to be with you except my brother's happiness. Eleanor turned her hand to lace her fingers with his. What if his happiness doesn't depend on marrying me? What if he sees, as I do, that we were never truly suited? Yates doesn't give up easily on what he considers his, Yorick warned, and he arranged for you to come here, made plans. I'm not a business arrangement, Eleanor said firmly. I'm a woman who made a mistake in agreeing to marry a man I didn't know, a woman who had the extraordinary luck to find love instead. Yorick's fingers tightened around hers at the word love. Is that what this is? He asked, his voice low. Yes, Eleanor said simply, at least for me as well, Yorick admitted. From the moment I saw you in town, something inside me recognized you, knew you were meant to be in my life. The kitchen door opened, and they quickly released each other's hands as Yates entered. He paused, taking in the scene before him, the two of them alone at the table, the obvious intimacy of their posture despite their hasty separation. Good morning, he said calmly. I see we're all early risers today. Yorick stood, tension radiating from him. Yates, we need to talk. Yes, we do, his brother agreed. All three of us, but first coffee. He moved to the stove where the pot still steamed and poured himself a cup. Only when he had taken a sip, seeming to gather his thoughts, did he turn back to them. I spent most of the night considering our situation, he said, and I believe I've found a solution that preserves everyone's dignity. Eleanor and Yorick exchanged glances, neither sure what to expect. Yates set down his cup and looked directly at his brother. You love her. That much is obvious, and she loves you also obvious. The honorable thing would be for me to step aside. Yorick looked stunned. Yates, I never intended, I know, Yates interrupted. Neither of you planned this, but it happened nonetheless. He turned to Eleanor. I entered into our arrangement in good faith, Miss Mitchell, as did you, but circumstances have changed. I'm sorry, Eleanor said, meaning it. Whatever his faults, Yates didn't deserve this complication. Don't be, Yates replied, surprising her. The truth is, I've been reconsidering our arrangement myself. What do you mean? Yorick asked, clearly confused. Yates sighed. In Topeka, I reconnected with Margaret Thornton. You remember her, Judge Thornton's daughter. We corresponded briefly last year. Yorick nodded slowly. I remember. You said she was intelligent but too independent-minded. I was wrong, Yates admitted. Her independence is an asset, not a liability. We spent considerable time together during my stay, and I found myself drawn to her in a way I hadn't expected. Eleanor felt a surge of hope. Are you saying? I'm saying that even before I arrived home yesterday, I was questioning whether our arrangement was still what I wanted, Yates explained. Your hesitation about setting a wedding date was in some ways a relief. Yorick looked at his brother with new understanding. Why didn't you say something at dinner? I needed to be certain of the situation here first, Yates replied, to confirm what I suspected about your feelings for each other. He shrugged. And I suppose pride played a part. It's not easy to admit that your fiancé prefers your brother. I never meant to hurt you, Eleanor said again. I know. Yates' expression softened slightly. And that's why I'm proposing a solution. Our engagement ends by mutual agreement. You and Yorick are free to pursue your feelings for each other, and he hesitated. I may invite Margaret to visit the ranch soon. The simplicity of the solution, the lack of drama or recrimination, was so unexpected that Eleanor couldn't immediately respond. Yorick stepped forward, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder. Are you certain about this, Yates? Truly certain? Yates met his brother's gaze steadily. I am. For once in our lives, perhaps we can both have what we want. A faint smile touched his lips. Even if your choice continues to be more dramatic than practical. Yorick laughed, the tension of weeks finally breaking. Some things never change. Eleanor watched the brothers, amazed by the understanding between them. Despite their differences, there was a bond there that ran deep, a bond that, remarkably, seemed to be surviving what could have been a devastating rupture. What will we tell people? She asked, practical concerns intruding. The town already gossiped when I arrived. This will only confirm their worst suspicions. Let them talk, Yorick said dismissively. What matters is that we know the truth. Yates, ever the pragmatist, had a different approach. We'll say that upon meeting in person, we mutually agreed we weren't suited. That happens often enough with mail-order arrangements that no one will be particularly surprised. He glanced at his brother. After an appropriate interval, you and Yorick can announce your intentions. By then, the gossip will have moved on to something else. Eleanor marveled at his practical approach, even in this emotional situation. Perhaps Yates was right, perhaps they weren't suited after all. His rational detachment, so different from Yorick's passionate nature, would have made for a challenging marriage. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "for your understanding and your generosity." Yates nodded, accepting her gratitude with characteristic reserve. "I should go to town today, inform Sheriff Wilson and a few others of our change in plans. The sooner we establish the official story, the better." As he turned to leave, Yorick called after him, "Yates." When his brother paused, he added, "I hope Margaret Thornton appreciates what she's getting." A rare, genuine smile crossed Yates' face. "We'll see. I plan to write to her today." After he left, Eleanor and Yorick stood in the kitchen, barely able to believe the turn events had taken. "Did that really just happen?" Eleanor asked, dazed. "I think it did," Yorick replied, drawing her into his arms at last. "Yates has always been full of surprises." Eleanor rested her head against his chest, hearing the strong, steady beat of his heart. "What happens now?" Yorick tilted her face up to his. "Now, Eleanor Mitchell, I court you properly. No more hiding, no more guilt." His eyes, those vivid blue eyes that had captured her from the beginning, shone with happiness. "And when the time is right, I'll ask you to marry me not because of an arrangement or a contract, but because I love you." "I think I'd say yes," Eleanor whispered, smiling up at him. "Only think," Yorick teased, his arms tightening around her. "Well, your courtship will have to be very impressive," she returned, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. Yorick laughed, then grew serious. "I pledged my land and name for you once already. I'd do it again in a heartbeat." "I know," Eleanor said softly. "That's why I love you." As the morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, Yorick lowered his head and kissed her for the first time, a kiss that held all the promise of the future they would build together, on this land, under this vast Kansas sky. 6 months later, Eleanor stood before the mirror in what was now her bedroom, adjusting the simple white dress she had chosen for her wedding day. Mrs. Cooper fussed with the veil, muttering about stubborn curls that wouldn't stay pinned. "You look beautiful, dear," the housekeeper said, stepping back to admire her work. "Young won't know what hit him." Eleanor smiled, thinking of how far she had come since that dusty afternoon when she'd stepped off the stagecoach in Willow Creek. "Is Yates back from the station yet?" "Just arrived with Miss Margaret," Mrs. Cooper confirmed. "They're in the parlor now. She's wearing the most elegant traveling suit, clearly a city girl, but she seems nice enough." The past 6 months had brought many changes to the Blackwood ranch. After a proper courtship, Yorick had proposed to Eleanor on Christmas Day, presenting her with a ring his mother had worn. Yates had given them his blessing, and to everyone's surprise, had announced his own engagement to Margaret Thornton shortly after. The town gossip had flared briefly when Eleanor's engagement shifted from one brother to the other, but as Yates had predicted, it soon died down. The fact that both brothers seemed happy with the arrangement confused the gossips, who had anticipated drama and discord. "It's time, Mrs. Cooper said, glancing at the clock. "Everyone's waiting in the garden." Eleanor took a deep breath, smoothing her dress one last time. The ceremony would be small, just the closest ranch hands, a few townspeople who had become friends, and of course, Yates and Margaret. Sheriff Wilson had even been invited, having become something of a friend after the misunderstanding was cleared up. As Eleanor descended the stairs, Yates was waiting at the bottom to escort her. He looked handsome in his formal suit, his expression warm as he offered his arm. "Ready?" he asked. "More than ready," Eleanor replied with a smile. They walked through the house and out to the garden, where white chairs had been arranged in rows facing an arch covered in prairie wildflowers. Yorick stood beneath it, looking more nervous than Eleanor had ever seen him, with the minister beside him. As the small gathering rose for her entrance, Eleanor's eyes fixed on Yorick. He was wearing a new suit, his wheat-colored hair neatly combed, his blue eyes bright with emotion as they found hers. Yates led her down the aisle with dignified steps, placing her hand in his brother's when they reached the arch. "Take care of her," he said quietly. "Always," Yorick promised. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. When they exchanged vows, Yorick's voice rang with conviction as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her for all his days. Eleanor's own voice was steady as she made the same promises in return. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Yorick's kiss was tender yet passionate, a public declaration of the love they had found against all odds. The small gathering applauded, and as they turned to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Yorick Blackwood, Eleanor felt a sense of rightness that transcended all the complications of their beginning. At the reception held in the ranch house parlor, Yates offered a toast. "To my brother and his bride," he said, raising his glass. "May your life together be as beautiful as the land we love." Later, as the celebration continued, Eleanor found a moment alone with Margaret Thornton, Yates' fiancée. The judge's daughter was elegant and poised, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "You've made Yorick very happy," Margaret observed, "and Yates as well in his way." Eleanor looked at her curiously. "In his way," Margaret smiled. "Yates needed someone who challenged him, who saw the world differently than he does. You would have been too accommodating, I think." Eleanor laughed, surprised by the other woman's perception. "I believe you're right, and you're not afraid to challenge him?" "Not in the least," Margaret assured her with a glint in her eye. "Someone needs to remind him that not everything can be managed with ledgers and practical solutions." Watching Margaret return to Yates' side, Eleanor felt the last of her guilt dissipate. Everything had worked out as it should, each of them finding the partner who truly complemented them. As the evening drew to a close, Yorick found her by the garden door, watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson. "Happy, Mrs. Blackwood?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "Completely," she replied, leaning into him, "though I still can't believe how we got here." Yorick chuckled. "From mail-order bride to accused thief to my wife, it's quite a story." "One will tell our children someday," Eleanor said softly. Yorick's arm tightened around her. "I like the sound of that, children running around this place bringing it to life." Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. "I have something to tell you," she said, her heart full. "Something I've been saving for today." Yorick's expression grew curious. "What is it?" She took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "Our first child will be here by Christmas." Yorick's eyes widened, then filled with such joy that Eleanor felt tears spring to her own eyes. "A baby," he whispered, as if afraid to say it too loudly. "We're having a baby," Eleanor nodded, smiling through her tears. "The doctor confirmed it last week when I went to town. I wanted to tell you today to make it even more special." With a whoop of joy that startled the nearby guests, Yorick lifted her off her feet and spun her around. "A baby," he announced to everyone. "We're having a baby." Cheers and congratulations filled the room, with Yates being the first to approach them, genuine happiness in his usually reserved expression. "Well done, brother," he said, clapping Yorick on the shoulder. "Father would be proud." As the celebration took on new energy with this announcement, Eleanor found herself watching her husband, the man who had vouched for her with his land and name when she was a stranger, who had shown her the beauty of the Kansas prairie, who had loved her enough to nearly let her go. Life had brought her west as a mail-order bride, mistaken for a thief. But love had made her a Blackwood, not through a contract or arrangement, but through the deepest connection two hearts could share. As Yorick caught her watching him and smiled that rare, transformative smile that had first captivated her, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the man she was meant to love, on this land that had become her true home.